and recording in progress. And how do you create something that is very efficient about the words it uses, maximizing images? I mean, I see it as an elevator pitch where your typical building is maybe 3 or 4 stories tall. So there's not really much time in the elevator at all to get your message across. I thought 10 minutes was very generous on your part. For me, it's more like 10 to 30 seconds if you don't get the attention. So I don't know, Sasha, can you describe some of the things that you did that were meant to make this plan more easily digestible?
Yeah, so like Jay said, we wanted to reach a wide audience that would champion the plan. And so we decided to rely more heavily on visuals, like to show relationships between the different themes, as well as rely on maps to show, spatial relationships and trends within Greater Basse-Terre. And the document that we're working towards, it was really designed, to be easy to read using images and to capture key points without having to read a lot of text.
That was Sasha's 5 minutes of fame there. And so another thing we tried to do early on is while the ink is still fresh on the plan when that happens, what immediate actions can be done. If they can fit on one hand, that's even better. So five things you can do, and trying to start some of these during the life of plan preparation, not waiting until the plan is done. And we'll actually speak in a moment to that first one, the interdepartmental working group. So capacity. So big theme, of course, is once the plan is done, it does turn to a lot of different agencies and departments to deliver it. And that assumes there is this magical capacity there. So maybe just reflecting on what happened 20 years ago, 2002 to 2004, and some expectations about how this was going to get delivered by whom in particular, what people, what was that experience? How does that compare to where we're at now?
In 2004, we were working in silos. The original plan was just done by the Department of Planning and spoon-fed to the different ministries. What we are having now is there is capacity in the other ministries. There are young planners in different ministries, not only in the Department of Planning, but getting these planners together helped us break through the silos that was holding back the original plan. So this interdepartmental group, it's cross-cutting. It's going to be a group that pushes the plan forward. As you can see in the first year, the 5 things, only one depends on government, which is the cabinet approval. The rest depends on the group getting together, getting the message across, writing the reports, and making sure that things run smoothly.
So this is a bit of a laundry list, but the significance of this laundry list is what came across during early consultation was that there were not necessarily trained formally as planners, but individuals with the title planner working on very similar assignments. In some cases, it seems identical assignments, trying to move forward in isolation. And so this group has met. There was a 1.5-day workshop with this group. They've been in communication since, and the idea is to try to connect, come up with an interdepartmental memo. Cabinet would ultimately have to approve this, but have them working on a day-to-day basis. So not a committee, but a working group that is still working towards similar objectives that they've been working on before, but now doing it in meeting new colleagues. I mean, I don't know if you had known your colleague, who's now a colleague in Human Settlements, Aliqua.
Yeah, we heard of her and we tried to recruit her, but it's government, so.
Right. So an interdepartmental working group is one approach to building capacity. Again, if one way to build capacity is you fund new positions, but the assumption here is that is unlikely to happen anytime soon. And then final theme was leadership. Without leadership, there would be no plan. So again, just reflecting on what happened with the Urban Revitalization Master Plan for Basse-Terre in 2004, how is this plan going to be any different? And not that it necessarily will, but how have we already started? Is there any difference between what we're doing now and what was done then?
What we've found is through engagement with the different stakeholders, we've discovered that most of the elected representatives, as I said before, had either written papers on Basse-Terre or had documents that they wanted to push through on Basse-Terre itself. So having a plan like this, a resilience plan for Basse-Terre, they were able to have some stake in it and it was aligned with what they actually wanted. And so I'm seeing that there's more traction now than before.
And specifically, what was proposed, and this is where it's not clear that the outcome will be any different, but what was proposed 20 years ago was something called the Basse-Terre Development Corporation. And that was meant to be an incorporated entity, serve both public and private sector purposes. But what's not clear is whether or not, beyond putting that as a recommendation, whether or not that began to be materialized in any way. 20 years later, we're essentially proposing the same thing. But we're not calling it the Basse-Terre Development Corporation. In fact, we're not calling it anything. And part of the challenge is there is an urban development corporation in St. Kitts, but what has been learned is that it is really an urban development corporation in name, mainly in name only. It is more of a property maintenance company. So the challenge now is, and maybe you can speak to how this challenge can be overcome, but how do you move forward with a development corporation?
Well, what we're hoping to do is to have it become a statutory body, basically, and give it more teeth in terms of putting it towards a particular purpose and having legislation behind it, which is somewhat different than the original body.
So the challenge is without some kind of leadership in the form of an entity that is not simply housed in government, can't simply be led by the private sector. It's most likely that this plan, like its predecessor 20 years ago, will have a similar outcome. And in fact, there was some implementation of the urban revitalization master plan over the last 20 years. But maybe you can speak to this, but it seems it was more coincidental than deliberately related back to the plan. So having worked in the region for a long time, one can expect that this plan, even getting cabinet approval, will be a challenge. It may be draft in perpetuity, but whether or not it is delivered has a lot to do with whether or not some kind of legal entity can be established that will champion it and have some ownership on it. And that's easier said than done. So maybe just to begin to wrap up, just as to how the plan 20 years ago got implemented and what you see.
So we were fortunate to have one of the planners that worked on the plan leave government and we enter in a different ministry. And he was able to spearhead some of those proposals because he's in an implementing ministry like Public Works. And that is how some of the proposals in the plan started getting implemented, because he worked on the original plan and looking for projects to do, took the initiative and started working with the planning department, breaking the silos, and try to get some of these proposals implemented. But it wasn't the full plan. It was just separate proposals that were quick wins for his ministry. So that was then, and hopefully now we could get a very comprehensive plan implemented, approved and implemented.
So to recap, some of the things that are different with this plan 20 years later, and again, we're not being cocky about this. The most likely outcome is 20 years from now, there's going to be another CUF number 23, where there's a group from St. Kitts talking about how we're going to do it differently again in the 2042 plan. But to recap, some of the things where there is a difference is how engagement has worked, trying to reach beyond just people within the physical planning department or the permanent secretary or the minister, but going beyond physical planning. That's been an important part of it. Designing a plan with an audience that has a short attention span and where after you've read the first 2 pages, that's all you really need to know. The rest is details. And that's an important part of it as well. Questions of capacity and leadership are really critical. And ultimately, it's going to be about leadership. And this will be successful or fail around the question of leadership. And my final comment is on resilience. In some ways, the plan itself has to be really resilient. It will have to have survived a fall of government that was unexpected and still be able to respond and engage with people who you don't know if they're going to be around the table at cabinet or not. We also had a major champion in the interdepartmental working group who announced her sudden resignation, effective immediately. So that took out a major champion of the project out of commission. So that was unexpected. And the resilience of the plan is you have a bigger team. You don't need any one person. So those are my final reflections before we go to Q&A. And any other final thoughts on your part?
set it off.
I did, eh? I thought you might say that. Sasha, you want to have a final kick at the can here? You're on the hook for a second draft coming up in the next little while.
Yeah, as Michelle said, we just really hope that the plan reaches a wide audience and can move faster forward over the next 15 years.
Thanks, Sasha. Thanks for getting up early. Sasha's in British Columbia, so she had to start her day a little earlier, 3 hours behind here. So that is the urban resilience plan for Greater Basse-Terre in a nutshell today, and then reflecting on 20 years ago.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank the presenters for such an excellent presentation. During the presentation, they really did summarize what went in the past and what they're doing new. So I would like to throw out a question to you. If you had to pick out just a couple things which you would like to happen to see this plan being fully realized, what would be those few things that you would like to say that you would love to magically happen?
I think this time around, I am happy to see that the resilience of the plan. As Michelle mentioned before, we had a champion dropout and we weren't deterred because there are many of us that can push the plan forward. And so I like the fact that besides unlike the previous plan, this one here seems to be as resilient as its name. And hopefully going forward, I know it's going to be tested, but we are very, very positive and we are driven in order to see this through to fruition.
I mean, I'm a consultant by training, so I always work within whatever parameters I'm given. I mean, we had a grand total of about 8 months to deliver this. So that is a bit tight. So a little more time would have been good. I don't know that more money is really the solution in this case. It really is about more time. A coalition government collapsing is just part of reality. It's really about how you engage. It would be nice if there was a little more openness or bravery on the part of public servants to engage with politicians. But I think that's a lot to ask. There's a lot on at stake here with a change of government, including your job. So that's part of the reality too. So I don't know that would change anything, but it's certainly, I'm glad we've had a chance to share some reflections on what happened 20 years ago. And it is very helpful to have the experience of a plan that this is built on with people who are still have the memory of what happened.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to open the floor up for questions. So just to keep the time, we'll probably take 10 minutes for questions. So I saw a hand go up in the back. Please ask your question. Sorry, there's a mic right there.
Hello. All right. My question has to stem from what you said about leadership being one of the more important aspects of this thing. But then what my experience has been with these things is that implementation and funding are critical for us. I don't know if Greater Basse-Terre is different than the rest of the Caribbean, but we have a lot of external influences that would deter how we implement these things and how funding come across for these things. And I know you said that, you know, y'all would have appreciated more time as opposed to more funding. So how do you get around that funding issue, and how do you get around the interference for implementation?
Let me clarify the comment on money wasn't a problem. Sound like Eric Williams, but funding to prepare the plan isn't the issue. Obviously, there is a third, so leadership, capacity, and financing are the kind of big three cross-cutting themes. We didn't get into the discussion of financing in part because we don't really have that much time and not nice to talk about it in polite company, but obviously financing, implementing the plan will have a lot to do with who's prepared to fund things. I mean, one thing I noted in the 2004 plan was a comment that said there should be no more development until a centralized sewage system is built.
Yeah.
Well, it's been 20 years. And that has a lot to do, I mean, a lot to do with money, and maybe it's not feasible. So maybe there wouldn't be any money for it. So clearly, yeah, the money will be an issue in implementing it. I don't know what you have thoughts on the challenges to implementation.
I've always believed that a good plan brings the money. And it's been, once the decision makers see traction in a proper plan, it will come. But that's my thinking. It could be naive sometimes, but that's the type of thinking. Once you have a proper plan and it can easily be implemented and they can see traction from it, eventually it brings the money. So even the money is important to us, is preparing something that you can see your way forward. And that has always been, based on my experience, our biggest problem. Preparing a plan that seems doable in certain senses, where decision makers can take it up and say, hey, I can benefit off of this.
Do we have any other questions? Dr. Mohammed, could you go to the mic?
Yeah. I'd just like to take some words out of your the 20-year-old attempt was an urban revitalization plan, and this is a urban resilience plan. And we have a urban revitalization exercise going on in Port of Spain right now. And I just worked, I saw he left, I just worked with Habitat for Humanity and the city of Port of Spain on an urban resilience action plan. And in fact, they're very different. The urban revitalization plan in many ways has much similarities to a urban plan in the classic planning point of view, whereas the urban revitalization action plan and strategy that I worked on it, I see Andres came back in, has a range of other dimensions that are normally way out of the purview of planning authorities or even physical development authorities. And certainly in the case of Port of Spain, a lot of it has to do with historical and embedded socioeconomic conditions, which leads to very low resilience in many communities that you have to deal with. So it's easier to deal with in some communities and much more intractable in other communities. I see Deborah Thomas says she will tell you about trying to deal with these issues in East Port of Spain. They're very, very complex. So I know in Bastia, you have a couple of very low income communities that have very structural socioeconomic conditions easy to address. Now, my experience as well, Jay, in working in St. Kitts, is that it is, even though you have a board, it's very difficult to overcome the interagency silos. So you could plan for it, but it still is a problem. And a revitalization plan for Bastia or Greater Bastia really has to be all, because of the importance of Bastia in St. Kitts and the economy, it really has to be all of government approach. And I'm wondering about who really are the types of champions you need to bring an all a government approach and not deal with it as simply a physical development plan.
Thank you, Dr. Assad. For us, I think the most important thing is this interdepartmental group. It consists of several champions. And what I've found, the word resilience brings a lot more traction than revitalization. Also, expanding the scope. The 2004 plan was just mainly revitalizing downtown Bastia, but we expanded the scope to the watershed area. And Bastia has always had a strange relationship with water. When we need it, we're in a position of drought and scarcity. When we have too much of it, it floods Bastia because of its topography. It's low-lying, it's below sea level. So we get flooding from the top. It erodes our guts, our riverways. From the coast, when hurricanes, it causes coastal damage, it causes coastal flooding. And so when we use it, we have waste water management problems, especially in the informal settlements in Bastille. So we've always had a strange relationship. So when you mention watershed, it perks people up. The decision makers are very, very interested because this is going to be a topic that they have to face, water. And so I am pleased that the name resilience is a better title than before. I think people play a lot on words, revitalization, resilience, but resilience is more encompassing in my opinion. And I found that we have more champions trying to make Bastille a lot more resilient than it already is. It has survived a lot of shocks. It's survived fire, earthquakes, but the stressors, the poverty, the alternative energies, our dependence on fossil fuels, those stresses are and the urban decline, those stresses are what's doing Bastille in right now. And so hopefully this resilience plan can address that.
Okay, because of the shortage of time, we'll just take one more question. And I see Dr. Carol Archer from UTEC has put up her hand, so she'll go to the mic.
Morning, everyone, and thanks for the presentation. I was just wondering to what extent you would have given to the funding of the plans. I think oftentimes as planners, we, prepare these very wonderful, detailed. And when we're asked, how is it funded? Oops. And I think that's something that decision makers, funders want to hear. So can you speak to that a bit? What thoughts went into the financing, and not just how much it would cost, but who would finance aspects of the plan?
I mean, I can answer that in part. So these 43 projects that underlie it, part of the approach in building the plan was to build on projects that have some degree of momentum around them. So this is not all a set of projects that are just at the early stages. Some of them are quite advanced, some of them have funding. And the idea is to use a plan to connect the dots. But that will only take you so far. I mean, we are midstream on this plan. So the second half of the work is really to engage those that control some purse strings. And going back to this question of good leadership, interdepartmental capacity, a good plan. I mean, those are all important. But at the end of the day, if you're not financing it with well thought through projects, it's not just financing, but it's well thought through projects that are feasible and achievable, then it will fail. And in my mind, it will need, whenever this new government will be in place. By the time that on August 11th, there has to be a new government in place. Someone around the table, a senior minister, needs to be seized by this project. And that there are precedents within St. Kitts for something like this happening. And it does revolve around a senior minister getting enthusiastic. So the approach now is you have to speak to a lot of members of parliament because you don't know which one of them is going to be in cabinet and which ones won't. But you have a pretty good sense. There are only 11 parliamentarians, I think.
Okay, well, thank you for your presentation, and we will now move on to the second presentation. So I invite the two presenters to come up. No, yeah. So in the meantime, I'll just In the meantime, I'll start the introduction in the interest of time. So the next presentation is Managing Assets to Adapt to Climate Change by Neil Dorr, Justin Elliott, and Bobby Snakes. Neil Dorr is president since 1998. Neil has been the owner and president of Tract Consulting Incorporated, a multidimensional company with experience in asset management, planning, landscape architecture, engineering, and project management services. Neil has very much been engaged in planning for development of both towns, regions, and their tourism industry, and has led to his firm's efforts in innovation, resulting in the development of a variety of planning, maintenance, management, and economic development models to support community and business tourism. Neil is a fellow of the Canadian Society of Landscape Architects and a Rotary Paul Harris Fellow. He is certified by the Government of Canada through Tourism Alliance, to deliver the Strategic Tourism for Areas and Regions STAR program, Strategic Tourism Experiment Program, and Accelerated Market Program. Justin Elliott is a civil engineer in training in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. Justin joined the track team in 2020, working on a variety of engineering projects, including site servicing, retaining wall design, and integrated engineering solutions for communities. Recently, he concluded an asset management pre-planning program that provided senior management of more than 25 towns with an understanding of asset management practices through 8 hours of live sessions. Individual sessions with each municipality and technical support for questions. We'd like to now invite you all to make your presentation. So you'll have to.
Thank you very much for the introduction. And Justin and I want to say what a pleasure it is to be here in the Caribbean again. Beautiful culture, beautiful place, beautiful people. And it's pretty exciting for us to be here. To us, planning is all about implementation. If you can't implement your plan, you just waste a lot of money. And it was really great. The last presenters echoed a lot of the themes that we've encountered over the years and some of the things that we're going to echo here. So planning that is, as I say, is all about context, socioeconomic, environmental, and cultural. And so I want to begin by establishing a context for where we come from. And I don't know if the lights here are on a toggle. If you could turn them down a little bit, it'd help a lot, because I know there's a little bit of reflection on the bottom of the screen. And I have a fair bit of imagery in the presentation. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about TRACT, what is asset management, how we feel asset management can benefit the parishes and towns in the Caribbean. We're going to introduce you to TRACT's 3-step process that we develop for asset management. We're going to introduce you to an asset management plan. And by way of future implementation, we're going to suggest potentially applying this model to some pilot projects here in the Caribbean. So who is TRACT? That's where we are. We're in Newfoundland, and to the left, that big block of land is Labrador. Newfoundland is about 160,000 square kilometers. We're a very large island with a very small population. We're kind of the opposite of you good folks in that a lot of your areas are densely populated. We do have a similar, we think our challenges that we have are quite similar to yours. We have a population of 500,000 people distributed over 5,000 miles of coastline. So the area is quite dispersed. And we have a lot of urban and rural areas, particularly rural areas, excuse me, that have limited capacity. At home, they like to call us the rock because it's rocky. Our average topsoil is roughly 6%. We have fewer sun hours than any other province in Canada, but it's a great place and we enjoy it immensely. And in many ways, believe it or not, it reminds me of here. We've always enjoyed a relationship with the Caribbean islands. We traded salt cod for your very fine Jamaican rum, which is where Newfoundland Screech comes from. And that city there you're seeing, that's St. John's, which is the capital of Newfoundland, Labrador. And it has a population in the urban area that's roughly half of the population of the island itself. And as you can see on the right, our history comes from the fishery. Most of our immigrants came from Ireland after the potato famine. And these were farmers who learned to fish. So again, I actually tried your fish cakes last night that are tastier than ours. And this is St. John's. The thing that we get a lot of, they say they make the wind in Newfoundland. It's windy a lot. And we get a lot of precipitation, and the rain falls at times at right angles when you come out of that wind, and we get a lot of snow. So we've been in business of creating for over 20 years, from municipal asset management planning, land use planning and engineering, community-based design and landscape architecture, Community engagement, bottom-up planning is what TRACT is all about, and it works. If you want to implement, make sure you have your community and your local businesses involved in the process. We're also place builders, we like to call ourselves. Over the years, I've been at this a fairly long time, and we developed an economic development model that's based on strategic placemaking. So we create beautiful places all over Newfoundland, Eastern Canada, and now into the Ontario market. And a lot of what COVID has really done and shown us is just how important places are for social gathering, for people to be able to get out and recreate. It's actually changing the way that we're doing business. The number of home-based businesses that have grown now over the years is really, really quite something. And there's a skating oval that we did that it works for tricycles and kids in the summertime, and it works for skating for those winter months. And it's actually changed the quality of the community and has allowed 4 new businesses have set up around this park now because of this amenity. And as I said, coastline, very difficult areas to construct, but we've been doing okay with it. And this is our core team. We have 11 staff and 8 associates, professionals. And as you can see, we're an equal opportunity employer. And our mission at TRACT is to be valued for the planning, conceptualizing, and building up distinct, attractive, welcoming communities where people can enjoy life and living. Quality of place is essential to economic development. And we started using asset management because we found many of the plans that we would develop, such as the very fine plan we just heard about, didn't happen because people didn't know, community didn't know, leadership didn't know what is the existing asset burden we're carrying. And when I talk about assets, we're talking about municipal assets underground and above ground. What's our replacement cost, and what does it cost on an annual basis to maintain what we have? And so we found a lot of projects don't get done because people don't understand the burden they're carrying, and a lot of projects are done improperly. We've had examples where communities go and pave a street, and 2 years later they're in tearing it up because the water pipe under the ground needs to be replaced. So what's asset management? Asset management really is planning for engineering. It's a planning tool that helps parishes and towns make informed decisions related to renewal and replacement of their assets. We look at different classes, and we're working with QGIS, which is open source software, and we use open source software exclusively. We started doing that because we found our smaller communities could not afford the license fees associated with off-the-shelf software, and it's free and it's working great. So we have small towns that couldn't afford a system with now a fully functioning GIS system, and we're also using a database called MyCivitas, which is, again, open source that small towns would not be able to afford if it wasn't for open source, which I think is quite an incredible disruptor. We look at stormwater, transportation. We look at your facilities, whatever you own. We also can do a fleet management plan. And you can also use the system. We do a lot of tourism and recreation planning, and we like to begin the planning by understanding again what you have. And we're also exploring and working on how natural assets can be used. We already know they're great for recreation and tourism, but we're also learning that they're also great for as what we call natural infrastructure. So in terms of asset management, this is not a once and done process. This is a process that when you buy in, you have to stay in it. So implementation becomes a key, and putting the tools in place to encourage communities to keep updating the data. This is database decision-making, and it's brilliant, but it really requires the municipality buying in on the front end. And the government of Canada has done a lot to provide the investment support needed to help communities make informed decisions. And as I said, it supports evidence-based infrastructure investment, and it also considers climate change impact in the plan development process. And we identify assets that are currently being impacted by climate change. So whose job is it? Basically, it's everybody's. With many of our communities in Newfoundland, we have a council. I think it's roughly 240 communities, and about 210, say, local service districts. And a lot of our communities have a council, maybe one staff person and half a position. So these communities have limited resources. So we really work on working with municipalities in a region. We started this in a little town called Woody Point in Grossmont National Park, and they didn't have the resources to make it happen, even with open source software. We made 6 calls to small neighboring towns, and in 6 calls, we had 7 communities agree to come together and do the plan. Been brilliantly successful, and since that time, we've done 70 communities in the province. So what are the benefits? One, it empowers. In the Caribbean, we feel it can empower your parishes and towns and makes data-driven investment decisions for their infrastructure assets. It develops a GIS-based asset registry, which is basically an inventory to sustainably store and maintain infrastructure data. We stored a system on clients' home computers, but we also keep a copy in the cloud. So if something happens, they always have a copy. We identify assets that are currently being impacted by climate change, and it helps improve communication between field staff, administration, council, and public. The last one is probably the most important. The people that are most engaged in this process are the people that are on the ground looking after your assets. And the people that embrace this process the most are the folks that have to find out, where's that curb stop? Where's the leak in that pipe? And they have no mapping. They have nothing. It's amazing. So we start by looking at as-built map. I'll get into that a little bit in a second. And I'm being reminded I better move faster. I'll try not to hurry, but I'll rush. How does asset management potentially benefit Caribbean communities? It supports consistency in your decision-making. It allows for fewer changes to budget requirements year over year. It's a quicker and more efficient budgeting and project planning year to year, and less time juggling competing project priorities. And most of these projects we're doing are in a range of anywhere from 30 to 60,000 Canadian dollars. We apply a 3-step process. First, we create a registry, and we look at what are the assets you have, and we inventory them in a GIS system that sets up a series of layer by asset. We prioritize assets based on risk, what's the probability and the consequence of failure, and then we develop capital and operating strategies. So the asset register, and this is our Ayla, just a brilliant young lady who's doing great work with us, and all the communities just love her. I'm digressing, sorry. Assets are recording using existing information, what you have. Remaining assets are recorded through field surveys. So we digitize everything we can get, and then we go into field and we check those assets with the people that are actually looking after them. So we look at what do we own, where is it, what's the condition it's in, what's its life expectancy, and what's it going to cost to renew that asset. Then we also look at what are the funding applications you might have made currently for projects, so we can get a handle on that. Look at your insurance forms, so we know the value of your assets from your insurers, and we look at your budget and tax information in terms of where you to financially as a community, in terms of your debt to service ratio, what's your current tax base, kind of get an idea on the level of service the community's providing. And then this is an example of one of those open source QGIS maps. That's a layer, and this is the water system in a community. So we capture where the water mains are, where the hydrants are, and then we prioritize. The second step, we base prioritization on the risk levels generated by determining consequences and probability of failure. What should be repaired, upgraded, or replated first? Like they say, do the first things first. Well, this helps you identify what the first thing is and what are the critical assets that no matter what you must maintain. And then we use heat maps to rate that asset in terms of its vulnerability. So this is just an example of a heat map, and we show you different findings and different zones in terms of where the reservoirs are, the different pressures, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, the colors allow the community to focus in on assets that are at end of life and have a high probability of failure. So anything that's red becomes a focus for the town. In terms of prioritizing, well, a pipeline, a water line that's hooked up to a hospital would have a higher priority than a water line hooked up to a house, for example. And then we look at what are the operational and capital strategies. So how do we put the plan in place? So we use investment strategies to plan for consistent spending on an annual basis. What's most critical? How will we fix it? How much will it cost? How will we fund it? And what can be mitigated with a backup plan, cost sharing, or deferrals? And there's on the right there, just some imagery showing you some of that stuff. And what's included in the plan? We provide you with what we call a through the first step, we review a preliminary asset infrastructure plan with you. We assess the risks and we assign priorities. We develop a 5-year detailed capital budget operating strategy. We provide for you asset management policy with a vision and goals for municipal assets. We develop policy statements and principles to guide implementation of the process. We assign roles and responsibilities, and we also provide you with a framework for climate change adaptation and green energy assessment. We've worked so if the community wants, we can integrate green energy into it. And it's not just, wind and solar and geothermal. We also look at your current system, will mini split work? What kind of pumping systems are you use? Do you have the most up-to-date thermostats? Those kind of small things that can make a big difference to your energy costs. In terms of sample reporting, this is a 20-year projection for a community. That line you see going across is basically where you're at, what you can afford to replace and fix over time. It allows municipalities to see that over the next 11 years, you're not too bad, but the next block of 5 years, you got infrastructure coming online that you can't afford to fix. So we then look at how we distribute those costs over time to keep you, if you will, under the line. And then we also look at and prioritize each asset group. So this is a summary of the findings for each of the asset groups that we looked at here, which is wastewater, stormwater, and transportation. And then we prepare a prioritized 5-year capital plan. So the community now has the assets that need to be renewed and replaced, what the asset is, where it is, and what it's going to cost in terms of capital replacement. So the town can begin to plan for asset renewal and replacement. A lot of communities we deal with are basically guessing on what should be fixed first, and the government doesn't like that, which is one of the reasons government helps to fund these programs, is because they want to know the municipal funds that they're putting forward are being invested properly. And the other big thing it does, it takes the guesswork for municipal leadership out of what we should do first. And, squeaky wheel in the grease, it takes the politics. I got a minute and I got 30 slides left. I'm only kidding. I don't. So in terms of asset management plan deliverables, Dan, we give you an asset registry with a GIS database with editable files, a capital program with a 20-year renewal and replacement projections, 5 years priorities capital plan, an asset management policy, a data management support, and asset management, and we provide asset management training on an ongoing basis. So in terms of added value, it supports regional cooperation and planning. It ensures infrastructure funds are properly invested. It supports municipal leadership decision-making. It provides a platform for community economic development. And it also provides a framework for climate change and green energy adaptation and emergency response planning. So what brings us to Barbados? We would like to do pilot projects. We'd like to identify somewhere in the Caribbean with a willing host, 3 projects, small, medium, and large. The pilot project, the process to create demonstration projects for proof of concept based on the context of where we are. So we would propose to adjust the model in terms of your local context, in terms of your municipal capacity and understanding what resources are, your local climate, your socioeconomic profile, et cetera, et cetera. And then we also are able to, for the 70 communities we've done, if the province came to us, if local government came to us and said, Neil, what's it going to cost us over the next 20 years, roughly, to replace and renew the capital infrastructure in those 70 communities, we could tell them. And if they said, well, what are we going to need to spend over the next 5 years in those 70 communities, we could tell them that as well. So it's a very powerful planning tool. And I want to emphasize that this is a tool for planning to engineer. And I thank you very much for your indulgence.
Okay, well, thank you for that presentation. I'd like to throw out a question for you. For those pilot projects, what is the one or two things do you think you need to happen for that to become a reality?
Yeah, so hi, my name is Justin, civil engineer in training. So one of the things that we'd like to accomplish here in the Caribbean is a way to adapt our plans. So right now we do a number of plans, you know, in Newfoundland. So we'd like to be able to adapt our plan into the Caribbean. So that's you know, able to learn from all of you and do knowledge sharing with the different communities across the Caribbean, so we can learn more about the kind of infrastructure that you have. One of the focuses that we'd like to continue with is natural infrastructure. So I know that the Caribbean has lots of great natural infrastructure. So we'd be able to learn from that asset, so that we can develop our plan. The plan is meant to be dynamic. So what we try to do is work with the towns and the different staff members and different divisions to be able to give them the tool, not just a document on a shelf, but it's a tool that can be used from all levels of government, right from your public works staff to your town staff to the decision makers that you know, decide whether or not, you know, a road needs to be paved or a water line needs to be replaced.
Okay, thank you. For in the interest of time, we'll ask for just 2 questions from the audience. Anybody has questions that you'd like to throw out? Okay, well, if there are no questions, I'm not seeing any hands. If there are no questions, I'd like to introduce Shamari. The presentation by Shamari is called Mobilizing Capital, Reimagining Community Development in Barbados. Before I do that, I'd like to thank the presenters for your presentations. That's very rude of me. Apologies, time constraints. Yeah. I'm just giving Shamari a heads up because he's coming in via Zoom. So as I was saying, the presentation is Mobilizing Capital, Reimagining Community Development in Barbados. I'll read Shamari's bio, and hopefully Shamari will come on immediately after. Shamari Jones is a graduate of the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine, where he completed the MSc in Urban and Regional Planning in 2018. Currently, he works as a sustainability consultant and is pursuing the Bachelor of Laws degree at the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill. His current research interest lies in the understanding of the relationship between the built environment and subjective well-being. In the future, he wants to directly contribute to policymaking in Barbados, and by extension, social and economic development in the region. So I'd like to welcome Shamari. Shamari, you can begin.
Hi, good morning, Dr. Olar. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, so my presentation is going to look at the role of community development financial institutions in the community development process in Barbados. And I'm going to look at why we should mobilize capital for community development in Barbados, then look at the challenges of community development, also look at the role of the community development financial institutions, and then make recommendations. So why is this important? One of the issues that has come up in recent times is that the provision of public services and infrastructure has become more difficult in developing countries like Barbados as a result of the unavailability of financial resources. For example, Barbados relied on tax revenue, and there was a decline after the 2008 recession, and also saw another decline as a result of the pandemic. So for example, between 2007-2008 and 2017-2018, Barbados's economic growth rate was negative about $390 million to the fiscal year 2020-2021, right? So that issue, along with the fact that there are changes in the development financing landscape, where the official, the traditional forms financial products. Along with that, we have economic challenges in communities. So for example, there's the issue of youth unemployment. And you see that youth unemployment is about 3 times that of other adults. Between the period of 1991 and 2013, female unemployment rates were much higher than those of males. Also, you find that where females are impoverished is to a greater degree than males, right? So as you see, females, the poverty rate, for females was around 18.1% versus males, which was around 14.6%, right? And females are the ones who have, a greater burden of care within the household, looking after children and so forth. But what I've found in my research is that with respect to community development in Barbados, there is a disconnect between the national development plans and the physical development plans. And this has influenced the way that we have defined community development and the way in which it's operationalized. So for example, when I looked at the national development plans for the years 1999-2005, you tend to see that community development is characterized as social work and a means of promoting culture, national identity, curbing deviance, solving unemployment. Those are the kinds of things that you will find within the plans, right? Then also, on the other hand, you will find that the physical development plans will promote more comprehensive development, and it will take a more holistic approach in terms of the understanding of what a community is. Right? And at the same time, they will seek to manage growth.
I think we lost some audio from Shamari. Shamari, are you still there?
Yes. Hello?
Yes, continue.
Okay. So, right. So as the literature tells us that, a community is more than just a group of persons living together, right? So it involves a geographical space. It involves a place. So if we go based on that understanding, then we have to ask, like, who's responsible, what institutions would be involved? And another challenge that comes up with respect to community development in Barbados is the fact that substantial issues, such as issues related to the built environment, physical environment, are not addressed from a community perspective, right? One of the things that the research has been showing is that there are other challenges such as dominated development. There's inefficient public transport infrastructure. is the limited porosity of different communities around certain communities in Barbados. There's the issue of gentrification and the changing of public spaces, as well as views from the inland regions. All of these different things affect your quality of life, they affect your mental and physical health outcomes, and they do influence a sense of community, which is what the traditional idea of community development seeks to engender, right? So, and I also want to say that there are inefficient structures and legislation, right? So you still maintain the old perspective of community development being about culture, national identity, and so forth, right? So this calls for a new understanding of community development, and one that sees community development in terms of an action working towards a result or an outcome. You see, it should also include the integration of local decision-making, the integration of physical, social, environmental, and economic aspects of the community. Given that, as we've seen from literature, the community is made up of human capital, which would be like your labor supply, skills, etc. Physical capital, which would be buildings, streets, infrastructure. There's also financial capital, which would be like your microloans or your development banks, financial institutions, and the environmental capital, like the natural resources, weather, recreational opportunities, and so forth. Now, turning my attention to community development financial institutions. In terms of defining it, it can be a challenge sometimes in that it can be defined differently based on who is defining it, right? But I've used this definition from the U.S. Office of the Control of Currency, where the office says that the community development financial institutions will be those mission-driven financial institutions that create economic opportunity for individuals and small businesses. They also focus on the provision of quality, affordable housing, as well as essential community services, right? So mainly their mission is to improve the economic conditions of low-income individuals and communities. And these would involve credit unions, community development banks, loan funds, venture capital funds, community development corporations, and microfinance funds. So when we examine the structure of the financial system of Barbados, we see that commercial banks dominate the financial structure, while the non-banks, such as the credit unions and other financial institutions, would be relatively small, right? So you'll find that commercial banks be main mobilizers of financial savings, and they're more oriented towards household and services sectors like tourism, transport, entertainment, and so forth. You'll find the credit unions are also mobilizing significant financial savings, and there is, to a large extent, a high degree of financial innovation where there are mutual funds, venture capital companies, stock exchange, and so forth. So in the Barbadian financial landscape, I have identified a couple areas, or rather financial institutions that we created into that could be aligned towards the idea of the community development financial institution. And the first would be the Housing Credit Fund. This was created in 19 USA guarantee loan. It was to provide finance to persons who would not, from a low income background, would not ordinarily have access to traditional sources of funding. And it would have been used to home improvement, through home construction, and for the purchase of lands under the Tenantries Freehold Act. There's also the area of financial institution, rather, of the venture capital investment. But this is small in Barbados. And right now there are at least 2 venture capital companies, the Barbados Investment Fund, which was established by the Central Bank of Barbados and Caribbean Financial Services Corporation in 1992, as well as the Enterprise Growth Fund. And with respect to the Enterprise Growth Fund, what we've seen is that it's a development finance institution that for the expansion of small and medium-sized enterprises, right, in the product sectors. So with respect to their impact, compared to 2020, in 2021, we would have dispersed $20.93 million, Barbados dollars. In the area of agriculture, they would have registered at least $844,000 in 2020, although they would have seen a decline to $367,000 in 2021. Also, in the area of energy, the fund would have appreciated with a profit of at least $230,000 in 2021. Also, in the area of industrial investment and employment, there were loan approvals which totaled close to $1 million Barbados dollars. And what I want to say here is that all of these different facilities are linked to positive economic, social, and environmental impacts. But what I've recognized rather is that the emphasis hasn't been on community building, and there is an emphasis on place-based development, right? Although the financial resources would affect persons or have positive externalities indirectly, there's no place-based development. And this, in my opinion, based on my research, goes back to the fact that there has been a divorce between the idea of the system of planning and community development, and the whole idea of what community development refers to. Lastly, I want to highlight the impact of the credit unions. Credit unions in Barbados have had a significant impact on communities. They have been servicing households of at least 76% of the economically active population, and most of the members come from low-income households. And during the financial year ending July 31st, 2020, we saw that credit unions in Barbados would have grown by at least 3.5%. There would have been which would have translated to about 7,500 new members. And total savings would have grown by 7.85%, right? So with respect to credit unions, which would provide financing for some measure of self-reliance with respect to individual and community problems, you'll find that they would provide affordable rates, loans for housing, for education, micro-business startups, home equity, personal loans, and so on and so forth, right? But again, as I stress, the main issue is that some of these financial institutions, do not have a place-based strategy. They don't have a community building strategy. Right, so in terms of recommendations, I can tell you that there is scope for community development financial institutions. There's a need for us to create a holistic plan that combines both the physical as well as the economic aspects of development, and to redefine the idea of community development. Yes, we do seek financing from major multilateral institutions, but there is a need for a a combination of public as well as private sources of funding. I would also recommend that we can amend financial legislation to allow financial institutions to invest in community-based development. Also, the restructuring of departments related to community development once we have identified what we understand community development to be. And lastly, I would recommend that we place an emphasis on place-based strategies for development. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Shamari, for that presentation. I'd like to ask you one question, and then I'll allow for 2 questions from the audience. If you had to, you did go through recommendations, but if you had to choose one, what is the most important thing that you would want done, which will facilitate these financial instruments, for example, to lead to community development? What's the one thing you would like done? Or you'd like to see something magical? What's holding it back? You know, what would you like done? I think you're on mute.
Oh, sorry about that. In terms of financial answer, I think that there is a need to, let me say, refocus what we understand development to be, and also that we can allow financial institutions to invest in more focused community-based development projects. That is what I think that we could focus on.
All right, so thank you for your presentation. We have
Hello?
one person
Because
here
I
and then one
think
person in the back.
the
So,
issue really stems
Carol,
from
you can go ahead
the
first, and
idea
I think-
of what community development is. Sorry?
All right, we have Carol. Go ahead and ask your question.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that presentation. It's an area that I'm most interested in, and I've been researching community development in Jamaica and in particular the Caribbean. So I'm wondering to what extent you have given thought to look at, you've been talking about the formal financial sector, but what about the informal sector contributing to the community development? So for example, remittance to contribute to community development, or looking at the churches and their role in financing community development, right? As I think that's what we are seeing, not just in the Caribbean, but elsewhere, the church being an important contributor to community development from a financial perspective. And then for me, the whole question of participation, because one of the things that would limit the involvement of the formal financial institution investing in community development is, you know, who, how, and what you would recognize at the community level, the institutions that they would engage in so that they would be able to invest in community development related activities. So if you could just speak to those 2 issues, in terms of the less formal institutions, and you talk about redefining community, looking at the institutions and the people and the process of participation, so that whether it's formal or informal, investing in community development related.
Okay, well, thank you very much. This was actually a part of my research, but just because of the time limit, I skipped over it, right? But I do agree that there are other less formal contributors to the community development financing. And I've seen it in other parts of the world, sorry, as well as in the Caribbean and in Barbados, where particularly like in rural areas, there is the idea of community savings or community-based savings organizations, right? In Barbados, we do have churches and other informal institutions being a part of the whole scope of community development financing. But what you find is that many of them fall within the category of credit unions and cooperatives, right? With respect to the second question on on participation, who, how, and why. Sorry, I'm trying to remember what exactly the question was about. I just remember it was about participation. Participation in community development. Dr. Archer?
I wanted to in your definition, because in the recommendation said we have to redefine community development, and in your redefinition, I wanted to know if you had given consideration for the, you know, who are the persons to participate in the, because that's one aspect of community development, the who, the what, the how, and the, you know, the institution, so that the financial entities can then engage in the process of financing community development. How would you define that? What are you looking for in the redefinition for community development?
Okay, so in terms of redefining it, I'm looking at the integration of local decision-making at the community level, which was, in my view, called for new, like a new administrative structure with respect to participation on community development issues. I've also looked at the fact that there would be a need for persons within a community, along with technical expertise with respect to some areas, but mainly, in my view, community development should be driven by the persons involved, sorry, not involved, but the persons residing within the community, right? So looking at decision-making at a local level, right now in Barbados, we don't have an administrative structure that allows for community-based participation. And one of the things that was highlighted to me in my research and interviews and so on was that there has been how do I say this? There has been one of the issues that the community development department has found with respect to their scope of work is that there haven't been many community builders, many persons coming forward. And this could be for different reasons. But definitely I have considered that persons within the community at a local level would be the main participants and the main drivers of community development. If we're looking at redefining the whole idea of community development, not from a top-down approach, but more from a bottom-up approach. I think also that Okay, let me just leave it there. Let me just leave it there.
All right, is there a second question? Okay, yeah, I think we're not seeing any hands up. So with that, I would like to thank you for your presentation, and I would like to invite the audience to enjoy the lunch that is provided, and we'll bring this session
Okay,
to a
thank you
close.
very
Thank you
much,
very
everyone.
much.